Hello BookTube. I've been wanting to do a comic book themed book tag for ages, and as luck would have it, I saw one last night. This is the Comic Love book tag. It was created by Lazy Owl, and Steve Donahue filmed this tag last night, and he tagged pretty much everybody who wanted to do it, and I'm taking that as enough of a tagging to go ahead and do the tag, even though I don't necessarily need to be tagged to do a tag. Anyway. But let's get started. Question number 1. Which comic book series made you fall in love with comics? The first comic book I ever got was an issue of Conan the Barbarian. But the comic book series that actually really got me into comics, they're the X-Men, Spider-Man, Batman. In part, I think, because of the cartoon series, which I'll talk about later. But those are the series that really got me into comic books, even though they really haven't sustained my interest. With the X-Men, I dropped out largely around the time of Onslaught. Spider-Man, during the whole, is Peter Parker or Ben Reilly the actual real Peter Parker, and the other one's the clone, which was, yeah. Anyway. And then with Batman, it was the later stages of Contagion is when I kind of dropped out from them. I mean, I have a really sort of up and down relationship with comic books. I'll love comic books for a while. Particularly as a kid, I was into them for years. And then I dropped them in high school, and then I kind of picked back up briefly in my mid-20s and later 20s. Question number 2. Most underappreciated or underhyped comic book. This has got to go to the Young Avengers, my favorite superhero team. So the Young Avengers are basically Marvel's version of Young Justice. They've been compared to the Teen Titans, but they're really more Young Justice in the sense that a lot of the heroes, the peak characters who make up the Young Avengers, are meant to mirror members of the adult team. So with the Young Avengers, you have in the classic lineup Patriot, who is Captain America, Wiccan, who was originally Thor and then later the Scarlet Witch. His kind of sort of its complicated twin brother Speed is Quicksilver. Wiccan's boyfriend, fiance, Hulkling is obviously the Hulk, and later a bit Captain Marvel. Kate Bishop is Hawkeye. Obviously they share the same name. Cassie Lang Stature is Ant-Man. So on and so forth. But the problem is that while they are popular, they've never really had staying power. So the Young Avengers were created by Alan Heinberg, and Heinberg wrote for 12 issues, which eventually went into insane levels of production problems because Heinberg was far too busy on other projects to really pay attention to the Young Avengers. So he left after 12 issues, and then rather than finding another writer to take over on a more permanent basis, which, while keeping the Young Avengers and having a consistent publishing schedule, which would have probably elevated their standing, I mean, there was also the danger of would succeeding writers necessarily understand these characters or really do justice to them. I mean, this was a period when the gay characters were being killed off rather liberally at Marvel. North Star, Freedom Ring. So, give or take. I mean, they did sort of have, after Heinberg's run, like event tie-ins, usually a crossover with The Runaways. And then Heinberg came back a few years later with a Children's Crusade, and then they went back into sort of limbo before Kieron Gillen had a 15-issue run, and then it again went into limbo with some of the characters being spun off into Hawkeye or New Avengers, so on and so forth. But I mean, the Young Avengers have never really had a consistent long-term run, even though as Marvel stands right now, I mean, that's very rare for a consistent publishing, given that every major event seems to restart every series back at #1, and every new creative team needs a new #1, and it's frustrating. Anyway, moving on to question number 3. Most loved LGBTQ diverse comic. Again, Young Avengers, because besides Eli, who's Patriot, Kate Bishop, Hawkeye, Cassie Lang, Stature, Jonas, the Vision. I want to say there was a 5th one that I'm blanking on. I mean, it's like, oh yeah, and Iron Lad, and Nathaniel Richards, I think's his name. They're the straight characters on the team. Then you have Billy Kaplan, Wiccan, his fiance Teddy Altman, Hulkling, Thomas Shepard, Speed, America Chavez, Loki, or Kid Loki, Prodigy, David Elleline, and Novar, who are queer. I mean, so ultimately the Young Avengers is given all members of the team majority queer or LGBTQ. So that's, I think, something to be remarked upon. And again, they're my favorite superhero team, and particularly Wiccan and Hulkling, who I absolutely adore. So anyway, so hopefully after this whole Empire thing, which is heavily focusing on Hulkling and with also Wiccan being in Strike Force, hopefully once those 2 series are wrapped up, there might be a new Young Avengers series, or if Anthony Oliveira is lucky with his pitching and lobbying, he might be able to have a Wiccan and Hulkling book, which would be awesome too. Question number 4. Most loved comic book superhero sidekick. Tim Drake's Robin. Even though you can argue, how much was Tim Drake ever actually a sidekick? Because, I mean, he's pretty much the first Robin to be his own solo superhero. I mean, Dick Grayson was his own hero, but he generally either was on the Teen Titans or transitioned to Nightwing, but when he did his superheroing, he graduated from being Robin. Tim Drake was the first Robin to actually be his own solo hero and hold his own solo book. But I mean, by far, the Tim Drake Robin, or Tim Drake's my favorite sidekick, and also one of my favorite superheroes as a solo hero. Question number 5. Most loved comic book publisher, if you have one. It's pretty much a slugfest between Marvel and DC. By the way, Slugfest by Reed Tucker is an amazing look at the decades-long rivalry between Marvel and DC, but it fluctuates between Marvel and DC. There are times when Marvel's really working it for me, and then there are times when DC's doing the better job. Right now, I'm more on Marvel than on DC. During the beginning of the New 52, I was a bit more on DC's side, but it fluctuates. Question number 6. Most loved screen to print or print to screen adaptation. I'm going to second Steve Donahue's argument that the Watchmen film by Zack Snyder from the late 2000s, early 2010s, is far better than the actual comic book series that inspired it. I mean, I personally dislike Watchmen, the comic book series. I mean, the plan was ultimately nonsensical. I mean, space octopus. And then there are bits that were just... I think the movie did a far better job. Also, excuse me, the 1990s X-Men animated series, which was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And maybe the Batman animated series too, but definitely the X-Men animated series is amazing. Question number 7. Most loved newly published trade paperback comic or graphic novel. I really haven't been keeping up with comic books. Like I haven't collected them in about 6 years. So I mean, I will check them out from the library. And some recent ones I've read. The first volume of Ta-Nehisi Coates' run on Black Panther I really liked. The first issues, or the first arc or volume of Jason Aaron's run where he had Jane Foster become Thor. Also the first volume of his, when he first started his run on Thor. I really liked the first two arc that dealt with Gore the God Butcher, but much of James Robinson's run on Earth 2 I quite liked. I mean, obviously this is like years ago. So yeah, and also just recently Marvel released a big omnibus of Kieron Gillen's run on Young Avengers, which I'm definitely meaning to buy eventually. Question number 8. Most loved POC comic book creator or comic featuring a POC character? I would go with probably Ta-Nehisi Coates. I really did like the first volume of Black Panther. I don't know if I've followed up with it though, with like succeeding volumes. Also, Raphael Albuquerque, I loved his art on American Vampire. Also, Hiro Mishima, whose fairy tale is amazing. And as for character, I'm going to go with, well, I would go with the Teen Titans. I mean, Cyborg, Bunker, who was introduced in the New 52. Also Solstice, so I'd go with the Teen Titans. Question, of course, the X-Men. Storm. Question number 9. Which comic book would you most, or which comic book world would you most like to live in? This one is a tough one because, generally speaking, I mean, if you really look at it, I mean, any given Sunday or any given day of the week, you might have Doom trying to take over the world, Dr. Octopus trying some insane experiment, an alien invasion or two, Hydra acting up, it's Lex Luthor having a new plot with Superman that will kill millions of people as collateral damage, the Joker going on a rampage, and for some reason having cosmic power. It's basically as bad as this world is. I mean, you pretty much have like an epic doomsday scenario about once a week in comic books. So, and then if you have superpowers, well, you'll be expected to actually participate one way or the other. So would either one really be all that great to live in, either as a civilian or as a participant? Probably not, unless you really have like a thrill-seeking personality. But if I had to choose, I would probably pick Marvel, even if I find Marvel civilians to be insufferable most of the time. But anyway, I think I'd pick Marvel, but I could go either way. Question number 10. Lastly, tags and booktubers. So if you're into comics, consider yourself tagged. Yeah, because I'm not entirely sure who all on this corner of BookTube are comic book fans. So, I mean, if you are into comic books, do you consider yourselves tagged? So I'll be back in a few hours with weekly reads. And until then, have a great afternoon and stay safe. Thank you, BookTube.